Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere soft and sunlit on the outer edge of the known world. As far as most medieval maps are concerned, you're standing barefoot in the morning dust of 14th century Moldy, and the earth beneath your feet is warm like fresh bread left in the sun. The breeze carries dry hints of salt, clay, and slow-cooked millet. Somewhere, a child is playing a single-stringed engone badly. Welcome to one of the richest kingdoms in human history, and you've probably never even heard of it. You're about to walk into the capital city of Nile. Though honestly, city might be generous by modern standards. There are no skyscrapers, no neon signs, and no urgent emails to send. Just palm-thatched roofs, wandering goats, and courtiers who take at least 2 naps a day. You'll get used to it. But, full disclosure, you probably won't survive this. Malaria, camel bites, and strict court etiquette are all real threats. Oh, and if you offend you're assigned royal storyteller. You might be sung about for eternity as the foolish visitor who tripped on a millet sack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are. I love seeing the little constellation of sleepy listeners light up from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly into the kingdom's heart, following a dusty road that hasn't seen rain in 2 months, but still smells faintly sweet from the last downpour. Niani isn't loud. There are no clanging bells or shouting merchants. People here speak softly, as if history is always listening in. A woman walks past with a woven basket on her head. Its contents, spices, papyrus, maybe a chicken perfectly balanced. She doesn't look at you, because here, strangers are just stories that haven't been told yet. The Moldy Empire in its heyday stretches over 400,000 square miles, yet it hums like a single village. It's held together not by barbed wire or loud decrees, but by lineage, griots, and gold. So much gold, in fact, that European cartographers eventually draw crowns, floating in the desert to represent it. Still, here in the capital, salt is sometimes even more valuable. It's cut into slabs, loaded onto camelbacks, and guarded like treasure. You watch as 2 traders haggle over one such slab, not with words, but by clapping rhythmically behind a curtain. It's a secretive, silent dance of fingers and trust. Historians still argue whether this wordless method came from necessity or clever theatrical flair. Either way, it beats arguing over parking spots. You stop under a baobab tree, ancient even by this kingdom's standards. The bark looks like a wrinkled elephant, and its branches stretch like sleepy arms. You feel the shade before you see it. A welcome pause from the sun that's more committed to its job than you've ever been to yours. A boy is napping nearby, his job apparently to guard a donkey that's also asleep. Good delegation. You spot a group of elders sitting on low stools, discussing the latest news, word from rumors of traders from across the Sahara bringing strange textiles, and someone's niece marrying a man who owns 3 donkeys. That's not a brag. That's serious capital. You listen quietly as a griot begins to recite lineage. These oral historians have trained for decades to memorize the deeds of kings, the births of noble children, and if you're lucky, embarrassing nicknames people had as teenagers. It's said that if a griot forgets your story, you cease to exist. That's a lot of pressure for someone who might also be drunk on fermented millet. It's here, in this quiet rhythm of daily life, that you begin to understand how this empire worked. The king, Mansa Musa, though he hasn't left on his famous pilgrimage, yet isn't a figure you see daily. He's like the moon, distant, luminous, and occasionally blamed for things he probably didn't do. His court runs on reputation, trust, and layers of unwritten rules. You accidentally lean against someone's granary and are quickly told with a smile that doing so could invite locusts, bad dreams, or worse, neighborly sight. There's a mainstream historical record that says Niani was a center of Islamic learning, trade, and architecture. And while that's true, it's also true that some of the town's best engineers are still arguing over whether a circular granary stores millet more efficiently than a square one. They've been arguing for 10 years. No one has yet measured the actual grain. You pass a storyteller who insists the baobab trees here used to walk, until they got bored and decided to stay put. You nod politely, and he rewards you by claiming that he, too, once outran a hippo by singing at it. You're not sure if he's joking, but he's got 3 listeners who are absolutely convinced. That's the thing about Molly. History is a living thing. It changes depending on who's telling it, and whether they've had lunch. Even the weather seems to listen, adjusting its winds based on which direction the gossip is flowing. You reach a small market, more of a gathering than a plaza, and a woman offers you a drink made from baobab fruit pulp tart, creamy and somehow fizzy. She tells you it's good for the liver, the heart, and spiritual clarity. She then asks if you'd like to buy a small goat named Penda. You decline, but Penda still follows you for the next 15 minutes, bleating softly like she knows your secrets. As the sun leans westward, casting longer shadows over the reddish soil, you hear the evening call to prayer echo from a distant minaret. Its design is simple: mud, wood beams, and an elegance that makes modern buildings feel a bit overdesigned. You sit by a low wall, watching people slowly close shop, braid their hair, and settle into the quiet rituals of dusk. A child offers you a sticky sweet wrapped in a banana leaf. It tastes like sugar and slightly overcooked philosophy. You've only been here one day, but you're already slowing down. The pace of the empire, the rhythm of its breath, encourages stillness. Even your thoughts feel like they're walking barefoot now, careful not to disturb the soft, whispering dust. Behind you, someone begins to hum a song about salt. You can't make out the words, but the tune feels older than writing. And as Penda, the goat, curls up at your feet, you realize this quiet kingdom, long before the gold rush, isn't asleep. It just doesn't need to shout to be heard. The sun drops low over Niani, not in a hurry, just stretching out the last of its golden light like a lazy cat on a warm floor. You're still sitting near that low wall, with your new companion, Penda, dozing beside you, and a slight sugar buzz from that banana leaf candy humming in your veins. Around you, the empire begins to dim softly. No clanging curfews, no shouting guards, just the gradual retreat of commerce, conversation, and cooking smoke. You decide to wander a little more. The streets here aren't paved, but they remember every foot that's walked them. Every market woman, every child hauling water, every royal messenger riding like he's late to his own execution. The earth itself is compacted from centuries of human footsteps. You think about this, distractedly, as your sandal gets stuck in something vaguely sticky. You do not investigate. The Molly Empire at this point is already vast, stretching across what today would be parts of Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and beyond. This is no mere desert kingdom. This is a civilization that understood logistics before PowerPoint presentations existed. You're led mostly by the smells of roast lamb and peanut stew toward the royal quarter. You won't see Mansa Musa tonight. He's still young, not yet the ruler who will tip entire economies over like decorative sun. But his name is known. Whispers of his intelligence, his piety, and his patience drift from doorway to doorway like incense smoke. Historians still argue whether Musa truly rose to power by accident, placed in line, only because his predecessor vanished on an ocean voyage, seeking the edge of the world, whether he was meant to rule or just happened to be next. The story always ends the same way: gold, glory, and way too many camels. But for now, you're watching him from a distance, just a figure in the shadows of the court, discussing irrigation with an older man who gestures too enthusiastically and knocks over a jug. Musa bends to help pick it up. That's your first glimpse of him. No crown, no throne. Just a young man in a linen tunic who still washes his own hands. You follow the sound of music into a shaded courtyard, where a group of young nobles are being trained in the finer arts of being insufferable. You've entered what you might call the Malian, but instead of wands and owl post, it's scrolls, calligraphy, and a teacher with the posture of a withered acacia tree who's rumored to have once written a poem so beautiful it made a camel weep. The students are reciting lines from Sundiata, the epic of Mali's founding hero. It's half myth, half memoir, and entirely impossible to memorize unless you have the brain of a griot or a caffeine addiction. The verse flows like water. The lion walked before the sun, and the sun said, "Even I must bow." You'd write that down, but you left your notebook somewhere back in the 21st century. Nearby, two scribes argue over the correct spelling of a word that doesn't exist anymore. You sidle closer, curious. They're trying to transliterate a Sun-ink proverb into Arabic, but it keeps sounding like a joke about donkeys no matter how they phrase it. You silently vote for the version that rhymes. Evening deepens, and the heat breaks. A soft breeze carries in scents of sandalwood and grilled fish. You hear the bubbling of a water clock, a device more poetic than practical, but very impressive if you're trying to impress visiting scholars. One of them walks past now, a bearded man from Cairo who looks deeply suspicious of the local beer. He's muttering something about too much flavor. You smile and keep walking, past low adobe buildings reinforced with palm timber, past quiet libraries where pages made of sheepskin whisper secrets under oil lamps. One particular scroll catches your eye. It's titled, "Roughly Observations of Stars and Smells." You don't ask. You let that mystery live. A servant boy runs by, barefoot, laughing, holding what appears to be a live chicken and a tambourine. The chicken looks resigned, the tambourine less so. You sit again, this time by a small garden of medicinal herbs. The woman tending it smiles but says nothing. She gestures to the plants, one for fever, one for bad dreams, one for ambition. You ask which one is which. She doesn't answer. You're pretty sure she's joking. Probably. The garden is quiet except for the chirping of night insects and the occasional snore from a guard, who's definitely been asleep for too long. A small cat curls around your ankle and then leaves, offended that you didn't acknowledge its greatness. You think about how most world history textbooks gave maybe one sentence to this empire, maybe a paragraph, if the author was feeling generous. And yet, here you are, surrounded by more life, knowledge, and deliberate, goat-related decisions than entire kingdoms in Europe at the same time. You wonder how many other golden empires went unmentioned. How many other cities with water clocks, lunar calendars, and thousand-line epics vanished into silence, because no one wrote their names down on a European map. One of the students from earlier walks past and drops a folded piece of parchment at your feet. You open it. It says only, "Don't eat the yellow stew near the well." You decide to obey without further questioning. Above you, the stars come out in impossible layers. This sky hasn't yet been named by satellites or streaked by planes. It's wide and full of questions. Somewhere out there, Musa will one day guide his golden caravan beneath this same sky. But for now, he's still a quiet young man picking up jugs in the dark. A nearby drum begins to thump slowly, not as a performance, but as a heartbeat for the city. A signal that it's time to rest, reflect, or maybe just finally give pen that back scratch she's been hinting at with increasingly deliberate bleats. You close your eyes for a moment. When you open them again, the sky has tilted. The stars have shifted. The empire continues to breathe around you, soft and steady, ancient and unbothered by whether you're awake or not. The next morning comes, like a whispered rumor, just a pale bruise of pink on the horizon and the sound of someone sweeping sand off a roof. You blink slowly, still half dreaming of salt pyramids and musical chickens, as the city of Niani yawns awake around you. Your back aches. Penda, the goat, has relocated herself to a more luxurious position, stretched out under a date palm, chewing cud like she owns the place. You give her a sarcastic salute and shuffle toward the riverbank to splash, your face with water the color of old bronze. It's cool, refreshing, and judging by the side-eye from a nearby fisherman, technically not for tourists. Today, everyone's talking about Succession, not the TV show, the actual, real-life, extremely complicated and occasionally goat-bribed process of deciding who gets to wear the crown next. At this point in Molly's history, royal succession is less Game of Thrones and more interpretive dance with legal documents. You see, the Cater dynasty doesn't exactly follow Western-style primogeniture. Eldest son gets the throne. No arguments. Instead, inheritance can shift laterally sometimes to brothers, uncles, or even nephews. Historians still argue whether this was a stabilizing tradition or a recipe for spectacular family feuds. You overhear two court advisors arguing near the palace. One insists that power should pass to the most competent heir, usually code for my guy. The other mumbles about divine signs and omens involving fish, which frankly sounds more fun but way less reliable. You decide to keep your opinions to yourself and focus on the sweetbread someone's handing out nearby. Mansa Musa, still just Musa at this point, is in the thick of it. According to some accounts, he was appointed as deputy king while his predecessor, Abu Bakr II, set off on a wildly ambitious journey across the Atlantic. The story goes that Abu Bakr believed there was more land beyond the ocean, and he wasn't content to rule a golden empire if there might be something shinier out there. He built an enormous fleet, some say 200 ships. Others claim thousands, and sailed westward with dreams of discovering a second Molly. He never returned. Now, historians still debate whether Abu Bakr's voyage was real, legendary, or somewhere in between. Some think it's plausible he reached the Americas before Columbus. Others point out that Molly's canoes were more river-friendly than ocean-ready. Either way, the empire needed a ruler, and Musa stepped in. He didn't grab power. He inherited it. Or maybe it fell in his lap while he was just trying to organize the library. But either way, by the time news broke that Abu Bakr had ghosted the throne, Musa was already quietly running things, and nobody seemed to mind. You follow a group of children down an alleyway, where a griot, a traditional storyteller, is warming up for a performance. His voice is raspy but commanding, like a tired lion with a coffee addiction. He begins the tale of Musa, not with riches or conquest, but with a dream. In the dream, he says, Musa walks through a garden of stars. He picks one and puts it in his satchel. When he wakes, the satchel is glowing. The kids giggle. One of them insists it was a mango, not a star. Another counters that it was definitely a mango-shaped star, and thus everyone is technically correct. This kind of storytelling is everywhere in Mali. It's how people remember, argue, and pass on truths that don't always line up on timelines. You begin to realize that for all its gold and trade routes, Mali's real wealth is its memory, the way history lives, not just in books, but in the air. At midday, you're invited to sit in on a lesson in the House of Knowledge, an informal school for scribes, poets, and thinkers who didn't necessarily get palace access, but still contributed to the intellectual engine of the empire. The instructor today is a wiry woman with ink fingers and a voice like polished wood. She's discussing trade, not with charts, but with stories. How do you measure the value of an idea? She asks. A boy in the front says, by how far it travels. She nods. Exactly. Our gold goes to Cairo. Our salt goes to Togo. But our ideas go much, much farther. It turns out Musa's early rule was full of such exchanges. He encouraged scholars from North Africa, the Middle East, even parts of Europe, to visit and stay. And they didn't just bring books, they brought debates, recipes, and occasionally, wildly incorrect maps. One guest even claimed that the world rested on the back of an enormous snake. Musa reportedly just nodded and poured more tea. You lean against a mudbrick wall that's been sunk for so many years it practically has opinions. Across from you, two merchants are debating whether giraffe tails make good gifts. The verdict is inconclusive, but it's agreed they're not ideal for wrapping. You're reminded again that this empire, while built on wealth, isn't obsessed with showing off. Unlike later European kings, who bedazzled their bedrooms and wore crowns shaped like anxiety, Mali's rulers preferred functional opulence. A gold sword, yes, but one you could actually use. A silk robe, sure, but not one that gets caught in doorways. Evening returns, as gently as it left. You're back in the courtyard where you first saw Musa. He walks past again, this time deep in discussion with two older nobles. He nods respectfully, but doesn't bow or strut. A servant lights a lantern nearby, and in its glow, you can just make out a map of the empire carved into a wooden board. It's simple but ambitious. There's space at the edges, left open maybe for rivers not yet claimed, or journeys not yet finished. You wonder if Musa ever thought of following Abu Bakr across the ocean. But instead, he chose another path, a pilgrimage east, toward Mecca, that would shake the known world and send European cartographers into a frenzy. But that's for another night. For now, he's just a young king, still growing into his gold, still dreaming of mango-shaped stars. You wake to music. Not the kind you're used to, no catchy chorus or bass drop, but a rising, rhythmic hum that seems to stretch from the earth itself. Drums, slow at first, like a heartbeat easing into the day, then joined by clapping, flutes, and the pluck of a chorus string. Today is not a normal day in Niani. Today, you're witnessing the beginning of a journey so extravagant, so stupefyingly extra. It would take centuries for the world to stop talking about it. Mansa Musa is going on, Hajj. This isn't just a spiritual field trip. It's a full-blown imperial production. By now, Musa is no longer a quiet administrator or placeholder prince. He's the most powerful man in West Africa, possibly the richest person on earth, and about to do the most on-brand thing imaginable: walk across the Sahara in a golden outfit with 60,000 people and enough gold dust to tank an economy. You're standing near the edge of the caravan, yes, edge. It stretches that far, trying not to get trampled by elephants wearing decorative saddles. They blink at you, unimpressed. Somewhere behind them, camels groan under silk-wrapped crates. Historians still argue whether Musa brought 80 camels or 300. They all agree the camels were carrying gold. Not coins, mind you. Dust, nuggets, decorative leaves, maybe. One legend insists he brought golden chess sets for entertainment. Another claims there was a tent made entirely of embroidered blue cloth and gold thread where Musa held court along the way. Either way, it's a vibe. You walk alongside the procession, watching as entire villages gather to stare at the glittering line of travelers passing by. Some wave, some bow, some just squint into the sun and mutter, "This man has lost his mind." The Sahara looms ahead. You brace for sandstorms, thirst, possibly bandits, but instead you're greeted with logistical genius. Camps appear at regular intervals. Scouts ride ahead. Water is stored in clay jars, buried beneath shaded stops. Musa isn't just rich. He's organized. One night, you're invited into a storytelling tent, a less glamorous cousin to the main pavilion, but blessedly quiet and filled with dried dates and roasted peanuts. There, an older man named Juma recounts the tale of the first time Musa saw the Kaaba in a dream. He wept, Juma says, tossing a peanut into his mouth, like a child who sees the stars and realizes they're not just holes in the sky. You ask how far to Mecca. Far enough to forget where you started. Juma replies, and maybe remember who you are. It's in Cairo that things get weird. Musa arrives in the Egyptian capital with his retinue, his gold, and his perfectly reasonable expectation of respect. What he doesn't expect is bureaucracy. Before he can meet the Mamluk Sultan, protocol demands he kiss the ground, a gesture of submission. Musa politely declines. "I kneel only for God," he says. This sparks diplomatic ripples from Cairo to the Red Sea. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Musa visits the Sultan without groveling, and in return, he gives out so much gold in the city that the value of the dinar crashes. For over a decade, historians still argue whether this was intentional flexing or a generous miscalculation. Either way, it's the kind of power move that lands you on maps drawn by people who've never seen your country. European cartographers begin sketching Molly into their atlases, often as a mystery kingdom in the shape of a gold nugget with legs. One even draws Musa seated on a throne, holding a golden orb, the size of a coconut, and smiling like someone who knows exactly how rich he is. Meanwhile, in Mecca, Musa is quietly fulfilling the purpose of his trip. He prays, he studies, he donates to poor communities, he commissions mosques and libraries, and perhaps most importantly, he starts collecting people. Scholars, architects, poets. Among them is Abu Ishaq al-Tanis, a brilliant architect whom Musa invites back to Molly to help build an empire not just of wealth, but of knowledge. You return with the caravan weeks later, crossing the sands again, this time with less ore and more sand in your socks. The people along the way still marvel at Musa's generosity, especially the ones who got free gold. Others grumble that he bought up every decent chicken between Godham's and Timbuktu. Back in Niani, the mood has changed. Musa isn't just a king anymore. He's a legend in real time. Children play with sticks, pretending they're camels. Women sing songs about the Golden March. Griots weave verses, comparing Musa to the stars and the prophet Suleiman. And yet, the man himself remains mostly quiet. You see him walking alone in the palace courtyard one evening, head tilted as if listening to something distant. Maybe he's thinking about Mecca. Maybe he's wondering if the next king will walk a path even longer. Or maybe he's just realizing that gold, while heavy, isn't nearly as burdensome as legacy. A week later, the first bricks are laid for a new mosque in Gao, then another in Timbuktu. Manuscripts start arriving thick with ink, thin with margin space. Students line up with papyrus and questions. This, it turns out, is the real Hajj aftershock, not the economic goldquake, not the royal portraits in Italian libraries, but the wave of learning, the soft murmur of scholarship that begins to ripple across Molly and far beyond. It's not loud, it's not shiny, but it endures. Just like the dust you still can't get out of your ears. You arrive in Timbuktu long before sunrise. The air still clings to the night, cool, breathless, filled with the distant bleating of goats that apparently operate on a 24-hour schedule. You're stiff from the caravan ride, and your ankles itch from where sand managed to infiltrate your socks 2 countries ago. But as the sun creeps over the flat horizon, lighting the mudbrick buildings in shades of honey and rust, you forget everything else, because this place doesn't feel legendary. It feels lived in, dusty, cluttered, stubbornly unimpressive. You pass a donkey chewing on parchment, hopefully not important parchment, and someone is roasting peanuts in a skillet that's clearly seen better centuries. And yet, beneath all that ordinariness, Timbuktu hums with quiet power. You wander past the Sanka Mosque, which doubles as a university. To the untrained eye, it looks like an adobe triangle trying to do math. But inside, students huddle around teachers, murmuring arguments about astronomy, Islamic law, and oddly enough, the correct way to fold a turban. This isn't just a school. It's several. Timbuktu has 3 major learning centers, Sanka and Sidi Yoya, all of them built or expanded under Mansa Musa's patronage. You can't walk 10 feet without tripping over a scholar or a manuscript, or someone pretending to be a scholar while napping under a tree. And the books. Oh, the books. They're everywhere, wrapped in goatskin, tucked in clay pots, hidden under floorboards during rainy season. A teenage scribe named Adama shows you one with delicate calligraphy and gold-trimmed edges. This one, he whispers proudly, is about camels with 3 humps. You blink. That's impossible, you say. Exactly, Adama grins. It's fiction. Very advanced genre. Mainstream historians agree that Timbuktu, by the 14th and 15th centuries, housed one of the largest libraries in the Islamic world. Thousands of manuscripts covered everything from theology to medicine, from grammar to star charts. One particularly odd text offers tips on dealing with unruly genies. Another includes recipes for ink, one involving crushed dates and what might be fermented goat spit. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's intellectual explosion was purely local or boosted by returning scholars Musa met during his Hajj. Most agree it was both, a homegrown thirst for knowledge, amplified by a king who understood that gold buys books, but books build empires. You sit in on a lecture at Sanka, where an elderly scholar with 6 teeth and 0 patience is debating the ethics of trade with non-Muslim merchants. It gets heated. Someone throws a fig. The fig is later retrieved and eaten. In the back of the class, a girl is quietly copying the whole argument into her wax tablet. Her handwriting is immaculate. You ask her what she plans to do with it. Compile it, she says. Turn it into a guidebook. You nod, impressed. You going to publish it? She shrugs. Nah, just for my future kids. Maybe they're goats, too. Later, in the market, you watch a man try to sell a book on herbal remedies. He claims it cures everything from insomnia to broken hearts. A woman nearby rolls her eyes and mutters, still didn't cure his first wife. The market is overflowing with knowledge, some of it practical, some aspirational, and at least one scroll that might just be someone's grocery list in disguise. You notice that traders from all over the region are bartering not just goods, but ideas. A Moroccan visitor asks for directions to the House of Books. You offer to guide him, mostly because you're curious and also mildly lost. The House of Books turns out to be a series of private family libraries, each tucked behind homes, often inherited through generations. The custodians of these texts aren't government officials, but everyday people who treat books like sacred heirlooms. One old man, nearly blind, lets you hold a manuscript about lunar eclipses. The paper crinkles softly, like a secret. When the sky goes dark, he whispers, "People used to think a dragon ate the moon." You glance up. Historians still argue whether that was symbolic or literal. You nod solemnly. I, too, fear the moon dragon. At dusk, the streets of Timbuktu glow with lamp oil and quiet conversation. Children sit on rooftops practicing Arabic letters in sand trays. Someone's reciting poetry about a river that fell in love with a tree. You try not to cry. It's been a long day. You settle onto a mat in the scholars' quarter. The stars above are so clear they look fake, like someone overused the sparkle filter. A student nearby is muttering formulas about planetary motion. He pauses, squints at you, and says, "You know, they used to think Saturn had ears." You nod sleepily. "I used to think cheese had feelings." It's quiet again. You realize that in all your travels through royal courts, across deserts, into camel-infested dining tents, you've never felt more at peace than in this city of scribes. It doesn't shout. It doesn't sparkle. But it remembers. And in the end, That might be the most powerful thing an empire can do. You're ushered into the palace just before midday, clutching your sandals in one hand and wiping sweat from your forehead with the other. The royal court of Moldy is not what you expected. No golden thrones, no lava pits, not even a suspiciously quiet parrot that turns out to be an informant. Instead, you enter a long hall framed with carved wooden pillars and breezy linen drapes. The air smells like sea butter, old parchment, and something vaguely nutty, possibly roasted baobab seeds. Someone offers you chilled tamarind water, and for a moment, you question why anyone ever left this place. At the far end of the hall, seated cross-legged on a woven mat, is the king. Not Mansa Musa, this time he's passed into legend now. This is his son, Magan, and while he doesn't glitter quite like his father, he wears the same steady calm, like someone who knows exactly where the shade will fall. The court around him is alive with quiet theatre. Advisors murmur in low voices. A griot chants the names of past rulers, while a court musician plucks notes that sound like falling raindrops. You don't see a single scroll, and that's when it hits you: this kingdom runs on memory. Oral tradition isn't just for folklore here. It's the backbone of government, diplomacy, even law. The jelly griots, if you're fancy, are walking archives. They can recite decades of treaties, royal decrees, and family feuds, down to who said what under which tree on a Tuesday. You watch as two men step forward to settle a land dispute. No lawyers, no wigs, just calm voices, a griot song, and the occasional interruption from a sharp-eyed elder. Who remembers when one of the men accidentally set his goat on fire during planting season? The king listens. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't glance at his nails. He just watches, really watches, until everyone has spoken. Then, after a pause so long you think he may have fallen asleep, he delivers his verdict. It's fair. Both men nod. One even laughs. You're impressed, until you realize they've just been sentenced to co-manage the same patch of land for 2 years. Historians still argue whether this shared land approach was brilliant diplomacy or just a way to make sure they annoyed each other into behaving. You step outside with one of the palace scribes, a lean man named Kaita, who smells faintly of ink and sesame oil. He shows you the justice archives, not a dusty room full of files, but a shady courtyard where griots train to memorize historical cases. We test them, Kaita says, by asking about old feuds and seeing if they remember the number of goats stolen. And if they don't, we make them carry water pots for a week. Knowledge must be earned and retained. Fair enough. That evening, you attend a council session where ministers debate trade routes and the best type of wood for canoe paddles. It's not exactly Game of Thrones, but there is a minor scandal involving someone smuggling cola nuts disguised as religious scrolls. The room tenses. You lean forward, expecting fireworks. Instead, someone clears their throat and starts quoting an old proverb. Even the gourd floats until it is hollow. Everyone nods solemnly. You have no idea what it means. Later, Kaita leans over and whispers, "It means the guilty one has already been emptied of credibility." Quiet way to say, "We see you." You mentally add that to your list of phrases to use at family dinners. The king's advisors are a strange mix, some born nobles, others scholars. One rumored to have been a retired fisherman who gave great advice during a flood. One woman draped in indigo robes, appears to speak only when it rains. You think I'm joking, Kaita says. But she predicted the millet crop failure last year because her knees ached. For 3 days straight. Historians still argue whether Molly's court operated on formal hierarchies or something more fluid. What's clear is that knowledge, practical, ancestral, even slightly magical, was valued as highly as birthright. You overhear part of a discussion about a neighboring kingdom sending an envoy. Someone suggests offering salt as a gift. Someone else suggests sending gold. Then the indigo-robed woman whispers, "Send a poet." Everyone pauses, nods, decision made. And just like that, Molly's foreign policy remains as poetic as its storytelling. You leave the palace in a daze. Not because of drama or spectacle, but because of the sheer functionality of it all. The system isn't flashy. It's not drowning in rituals or stiff with ceremony. But it works. At least, for now. As you walk back toward your sleeping mat, a soft breeze ruffles your tunic. The stars are blinking to life again. Someone nearby is singing a lullaby about a clever tortoise who stole the sun. You lie down, eyes heavy, and whisper the proverb to yourself. Even the gourd floats, until it is hollow. You're not sure what kind of leader you'd be, but you're pretty sure your court would have snacks. You wake to the sound of pounding millet. Not in a metaphorical, soulful way, just actual pounding. Mortar and pestles thudding rhythmically as if the entire kingdom is making breakfast to a communal drumbeat. You squint into the morning sun and spot a line of women outside a courtyard, moving in synchronized swings, each with a wooden pestle taller than a toddler. The air smells of roasted grain, fresh smoke, and that oddly comforting smell of slightly burnt porridge. Welcome to a normal morning in the Molly Empire, before the merchants haggle and the scribes sharpen their pens. There's breakfast to be had, usually millet porridge called too, sometimes sweetened with honey, sometimes laced with baobab powder if someone in the family feels fancy. A boy hands you a wooden bowl with a grin. You thank him and try a bite. Solid, nutty, slightly gluey. It grows on you, though not as quickly as it grows between your teeth. You glance around and realize no one is eating alone. Even the goats seem to be loitering for leftovers. This is a culture built on shared rhythms. You follow your host family through their morning. The father checks the grain stores. The mother trades dried fish for cloth. One of the kids is in charge of chasing chickens back into their designated panic zones. Meanwhile, the eldest daughter is weaving cotton strips that will be stitched into boggle fiend. You've heard of it, seen reproductions in overpriced furniture stores. But here, it's alive, dyed with fermented mud, adorned with symbolic patterns passed down like secret recipes. She lets you try painting one. You mess up the pattern for good harvest, and accidentally create the symbol for awkward uncle. She forgives you, kind of. Mainstream historians tell us that Molly's textile production was renowned throughout the region, especially its indigo-dyed cloth and rich embroidery. But what gets less attention is the design language encoded into everyday garments. Each line has a meaning, each spot a story. You pause to imagine if your sweatpants back home said anything more profound than Tuesday. Children, you'll notice, aren't exactly babied here, but they're definitely part of the action. Toddlers toddle through the market with terrifying autonomy. A group of 10-year-olds practices wrestling moves beside the well, while someone in the background sings a song about a hyena who couldn't dance. One boy is busy carving a toy camel. Another is playing Mancala with a grandmother who may or may not be cheating. Did you win? You ask him. No, he sighs. But she gave me dried mango after. So, net positive. You sit in the shade with the elders as they discuss everything from moon cycles to whose cow wandered into whose millet. There's laughter, a few jokes about donkeys with no sense of direction, and one extremely long story about a snake that borrowed shoes. Historians still argue whether stories like these served purely as entertainment or functioned as mnemonic devices, tools to encode legal precedent, agricultural knowledge, even subtle warnings about local politics. A scholar once proposed that some animal tales doubled as law-risk ways to critique nobility. You're not sure, but when someone starts a parable about a lion with too many advisors, everyone chuckles a little too knowingly. You're handed a calabash of shea butter to rub on your sunburnt nose. It works, smells vaguely like roasted almonds and hope. Around midday, the market buzzes back to life. You weave through stalls of spices, smoked meats, palm oil, and dried hibiscus. Everyone is selling something, and no one is shouting. Trade here is surprisingly calm. Transaction meets conversation, and bargaining sounds like a polite game of chess. A woman beckons you toward a stall selling charms made from crocodile teeth, feathers, and amulets wrapped in leather. You raise an eyebrow. For protection, she says, especially from petty arguments. Does it work? She smiles. My husband hasn't won an argument in 10 years. Noted. In a nearby stall, a teenage boy is carefully inscribing Quranic verses onto wooden tablets, using ink made from acacia bark. He says his dream is to one day write a scroll, so beautiful that even camels will stop to admire it. That feels ambitious, but noble. You pass a group of women making soap from ash, and one is humming a tune that gets stuck in your head before you've walked 5 feet. Another is swatting flies with a broom made of twigs and sarcasm. You stop to rest beneath a mango tree where someone's goat is trying to become a bird. It's halfway up the lower branches and making eye contact like this is fine. You sip water from a gourd. The heat wraps around you like a sleepy blanket. Somewhere nearby, someone's playing a kora, its harp-like notes. So gentle you forget for a moment that you read technically on a historical reconnaissance mission. You overhear to elders debating whether the rainy season is coming early. One swears by the flight pattern of storks. The other swears by the way his ankles creak. You don't take sides, but quietly admire their commitment to science. As evening settles, families gather to eat again, this time a stew of rice, fish, and crushed okra. You help stir the pot, careful not to oversalt it. A little girl hands you a flower and declares you assistant chef of the western sky. You accept the title. That night, stretched out on a sleeping mat under mosquito nets, you reflect on the steady magic of daily life. It's not glamorous. It's not gold dip, but it's whole. It's a society that functions not because of palaces or battles, but because people get up, pound millet, tell stories, settle disputes, and share stew with strangers. You wake up groggy and warm, nose pressed to a straw mat that smells like last night's stew and tomorrow's laundry. Kaita, the scribe, appears in the doorway, already dressed and annoyingly cheerful. Today, he says, you meet the salt. You're not entirely sure if that's a person, a spirit, or just breakfast. It's none of those. You're going on a caravan. Not a quick stroll, either. This is the trans-Saharan journey of salt, yes. Literal salt. Mined from the scorching to Gaza, flats in the north, and carried on camelback across hundreds of miles of shifting sand dunes. Also, someone can properly season a pot of rice. Seems dramatic, but as Cater gently reminds you, salt is not a spice here. It's survival. By mid-morning, you're bumping along on a camel with the disposition of a grumpy librarian. The caravan leader, a leathery-faced man named Naji, is shouting instructions like, "Tie that tighter," and "Don't pet the camels, they bite with purpose." The sun is relentless. Your eyebrows start sweating. The caravan is at least 100 camels deep. Each is loaded with salt slabs, flat, greyish bricks carved from the salt mines in Tagaza. They're heavy, really heavy, and somehow each camel looks like it has personal issues with gravity. Salt is currency here. Literal currency. In fact, one of the more famous lines in West African lore is that in some areas, salt was once traded ounce for ounce with gold. Historians still argue whether that was metaphor, myth, or just one wildly lucky salt trader who showed up when everyone ran out of spice. The caravan stops for rest under a solitary acacia tree that looks like it regrets all its life choices. Naji passes you a skin of warm goat's milk and a date stuffed with peanuts. You chew thoughtfully, watching as traders gently wipe dust from their salt slabs, as if they're prized heirlooms. Salt, after all, doesn't just flavor food, it preserves it. Before refrigerators and icebox, and that one weird uncle with a chest freezer in his garage. Salt was what kept meat edible, fish transportable, and empires from, well, rotting. You meet Mariam, a woman traveling with the caravan to secure salt for her village's market. She tells you she's done this journey 5 times. You ask if it gets easier. She stares into the distance and mutters something about blisters and camel farts. Noted. At night, the caravan forms a lazy spiral, camels tied in loose circles, fires burning low, pots bubbling with millet and dried meat. The stars are absurdly bright. You lie back, belly full, ears tuned to the sounds of traders swapping stories. One man claims to have seen a sand spirit dance during a mirage. Another says his camel once predicted rain. You try to join in by mentioning the time. Your weather app failed you 3 days in a row. They are not impressed. In the morning, a sandstorm greets you like an uninvited cousin. Scarves go up. Camels groan. Visibility drops to just enough to trip over someone's cooking pot. You trudge blindly for hours, legs aching, nostrils full of desert, and still somehow the caravan moves forward, step by patient step. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of gritty meditation. Walk, rest, walk, tie down a salt slab, readjust the goat milk pouch. Complain to your camel, who gives you side eye like it understands and doesn't care. By the 3rd day, you understand why the traders speak of this journey with both reverence and exhaustion. It's not just transport, it's tradition, survival, and stubborn dignity rolled into one slow, sunburned parade. Kaita points out the silent code of the caravan. A sideways glance means shift your load. A whistled note means time to stop. A dropped sandal, that's may the desert reclaim your fashion sense. You reach a desert outpost just before dusk. A collection of tents and low buildings surrounded by thorny fences. Water is rationed, salt is weighed, and the market bursts into life like someone hit unmute. Traders from Timbuktu, Gao, even beyond the Niger River gather here to barter salt for cola nuts, salt for cloth, salt for copper. You overhear a spirited debate about whether a salt slab chipped at the corner is still worth a full goat. Miriam gets her crates filled, counts them twice, then turns to you and says, "Next time, bring your own camel." As you prepare to return to the main city, Kaita shares a final tale, one of a caravan that vanished, only to be found years later perfectly preserved, the salt keeping both goods and traders eerily intact. Historians still argue whether it's true, or just a salty ghost story told to keep novices from wandering too far. You think about that long into the night. Salt, so simple, so vital, so heavy. By the time you return to the cool breezes of the city, you no longer look at salt the same way. You watch someone sprinkle it over a stew, and you think, that used to ride a camel. You blink the desert dust from your eyelashes as the gates of Timbuktu rise ahead, carved from warm-toned mud brick and etched with the fingerprints of centuries. It's quiet here, not silent, just hushed, like even the breeze is trying not to interrupt. You've arrived in the city of paper, not gold, not salt, not even millet today, but books, scrolls, manuscripts by the thousand, tucked into adobe libraries, private homes, and whispering corners of ancient mosques. Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the hushed streets of 14th century Moldy, in a city where the sand carried ideas and the air itself smelled faintly of ink and goat, parchment. You'll tread gently past mosques carved from mud and dreams, into homes where even the dust has footnotes. Just a heads up, if you're hoping to skim the required reading, you probably won't survive this semester. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass through the Jingabur Mosque first, its wooden Toran beams jutting from the mud brick like fossilized ladder rungs. There's a coolness inside, the kind that's not just from architecture, it's reverence cooled into walls. A muezzin's voice echoes softly, drifting over the rooftops. Children recite Arabic phrases in sing-song tones, while scribes, in lullit rooms copy ancient texts by hand, dipping reed pens into walnut ink. You trail Kaita into a small home that doubles as a private library. He nudges open a creaky wooden door and gestures to shelves, lined with leather-bound manuscripts, folded scrolls, and brittle fragments of brilliance. These, he says, are the treasures no army can carry. He hands you a volume no bigger than a paperback, its cover a mosaic of wear and dignity. You open it carefully. It's not a novel. It's a treatise on astronomy, written in flowing Arabic script with diagrams of star positions and a helpful footnote in the margin. May God bless the reader who doesn't drop this in soup. Even ancient scholars had a sense of humor. Mainstream history books tend to skim over this chapter, as if Africa before colonialism existed only in oral storytelling or drums and dances. But here in Timbuktu, especially during the Moldy Empire's golden stretch, there were literal universities. Thousands of students came to study theology, law, mathematics, medicine, and the kind of philosophy that makes you stare at mango trees until you forget your name. One scholar, Ahmad Baba, supposedly owned over 1,600 books, which might not sound like much until you remember that each was hand-preserved in desert humidity and annotated with the kind of sass you thought only Twitter could deliver. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's curriculum rivaled that of contemporary European universities, but the sheer scale of its written output, undeniable. You lean over a scroll on surgical techniques, which suggests using fine iron tools sterilized in ash water. The script includes a stern warning: do not try this on your cousin. You pass a corridor where students discuss theology over cups of date wine, non-alcoholic. To be clear, you're still in the Islamic world, and parties here end with footnotes, not hangovers. One student passionately debates whether stars influence personality. His friend insists they just influence goats. A teacher interrupts to say, "You're both wrong. Stars influence deadlines." You nod like you understand and sneak a second fig from the plate. Outside, you wander through the Sanka Quarter, where more manuscript libraries live in quiet, crumbling glory. A librarian lets you flip through a 14th debate on whether laughter increases lifespan. You smirk maybe, if it's not during camel rides. You ask how these books survived. She shrugs. We hide them. We read them. We remember them. The manuscripts cover everything: medicinal herbs, rainfall patterns, trade agreements, tax records, proverbs, and recipes. Yes, actual 14th century food notes. One even includes instructions for cooking: dried fish in she, butter with pickled baobab bark, followed by a single sentence: only serve 2 people you like. You imagine passing that test. In a side room, a young scribe shows you his calligraphy practice. It's uneven, but proud. He says he wants to be like his grandfather, who once copied all of Ibn Khaldun by candlelight using a brush made from horsehair. You ask if that's hard. He looks at you like you've asked if breathing is tricky. It's hard, he says, not to copy well. Outside, the sun dips low, painting shadows between alleys. You find a quiet rooftop with who's holding a scroll so old it smells like the inside of time. He reads it aloud, a poem on justice. It doesn't rhyme, but it does linger. You sit quietly, watching the last lights slide across mud walls and tiled domes. In the distance, a librarian locks her door, cradling a bundle of scrolls like someone tucking in a child. Not every library has to be loud. Some just breathe. And here, in Timbuktu, the books don't shout. They whisper. And somehow, that's enough to echo across centuries. The river hums before you see it, slow, syrupy, and vast. The Niger. It doesn't roar like a European mountain stream. It doesn't sparkle theatrically like the Nile. It just glides, smooth and stubborn, like an elder who refuses to be rushed. You're on a flat-bottomed canoe carved from a single baobab tree. It wobbles just enough to keep you humble. Your guide, a wiry man named Amadou, with arms like braided rope, poles the boat through papyrus banks and drifting hyacinth. This river, he says, knows all your secrets, but it forgets them by dinner. You decide not to test that theory. As Timbuktu fades behind you, you drift south into the lesser-known folds of the Moldy Empire. Towns not marked on maps, but alive with trade, story, and a low, constant rhythm of drums and paddles. You stop first at Kabara, Timbuktu's port suburb. Not glamorous, but crucial. A muddy nerve-ending connecting caravan and canoe. Porters shout, goats panic. and a suspicious number of chickens seem to be running unpaid errands. From there, you sail into a network of water towns that ripple like a necklace. Daya, Gondom, each with its own smells, accents, and preferred fried starch. In Nile, you're welcomed with a bowl of funny porridge and a warning not to wear sandals. Near the fishing docks, you heed it immediately. After watching a catfish the size of your torso lurch onto a vendor's table and stare at you like you owe it money. Markets here float. Literally, canoes sidle up beside each other, swapping smoked fish, cola nuts, pottery, and gossip. A woman in a red headscarf paddles past, selling cinnamon soap and unsolicited marriage advice. You smell spices before you hear the singing. There's music, always. The kind that sneaks up from alleyways and doorframes. A griot plucks a ngoni and sings of the river's moods. His lyrics compare the Niger to a clever wife calm until you say the wrong thing. You nod wisely, then step on a crab. One town celebrates your arrival with a shadow, puppet performance, crinkled paper, animals dancing across a linen, screen lit by oil lamp. The children cheer. The old women laugh softly when one puppet falls over and is resurrected with dramatic flair. Your favorite character is a crocodile who refuses to pay taxes and keeps eating the mayor's sandals. Historians still argue whether this is based on a real incident over sweet tea and roasted yams. An elder tells you that the river doesn't just carry goods, it carries ideas. Rumors float here. So do songs. And once, supposedly, a carved message bottle from a king in Ife drifted all the way to Gao. No one agrees what it said. Some say it was a love letter. Others claim it was just an elaborate fish order. The Niger Delta towns are looser in structure than regal Timbuktu. There's more laughter, more fish smoke, and less pressure to walk in a straight line. People here are both river folk and impia folk linked to the Molly kingdom, but also beholden to their own elders, spirits, and flood calendars. You attend a rain ceremony in one village, where people toss millet into the river and chant lullabies for the clouds. It doesn't rain, but the cloud does yawn. You count that as partial success. In one particularly sleepy village, you're handed a carved flute and told it's used to mimic crocodile mating calls. You decline politely. The village healer shows you her collection of dried herbs and river stones. One smells like mint and memory. She crushes it into a paste and paints a stripe on your forehead. For clarity, she says, of thought. You ask. No, she says. Of skin. You've got sunburn. At sunset, the boats light small lanterns. They float like fireflies, reflecting on the river's glossy skin. Children dive and surface with reeds in their mouths, pretending to be hippos. A man tells a story of a fish who stole a necklace from a princess and now guards it in a whirlpool near Jen. You wonder if he's making it up. He winks and says, only when the fish forgets the words. Your canoe drifts quietly, the stars thickening above. You're rocked gently by the current, belly full of stew, brain full of riverside trivia. Historians still argue whether these towns were official tributaries of the Molly Empire or simply willing neighbors. But in the rhythm of life here, in the spice of their food, in the ink of their scrolls, in the bounce of their drums, you feel the pulse of something grander than a border. Something wet, warm, and wonderfully unbothered by maps. Kaita joins you again near the next dock. He smells like roasted plantain and enthusiasm. Tomorrow, he says, we head east. Toward Gao. You ask if it's far. He grins. Everything's far until you're already there. You pull your blanket tighter as the river murmurs beneath you, promising more whispers, more footprints in water, more jokes told to fish.